समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
2025 is the year of many important anniversaries, and we'll be spoiled for choice to feature some of those on Cut the Clutter. I will give you some examples from the top of my head. It's the 100th anniversary of the founding of the RSS. It's also the 100th anniversary of the founding of the CPI, Communist Party of India, which later split into CPM and CPI, one pro-Soviet, one pro-Beijing, as it was seen when they split. Then it is the 50th year of the emergency. It is the 50th year of the assassination of Mujibur Rahman. Regrettably and ironically, also the year in which his party, the party he founded and party which played a stellar role in the liberation of Bangladesh, being banned from political activity. 50 years back, Sheikh Mujib was assassinated. It's if you spread your eye a little bit far away from politics, it is 50 years of the film Sholay. It is 30 years of DDLJ, Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge. It's the 100th anniversary, birth anniversary of Guru Dutt. It's the 60th year of the Khans. All three Khans turned 60 this year. However, there is one more anniversary which is our focus today for Cut the Clutter. That is the 50th anniversary of the merger of Sikkim with India. On this day, 16th of May 1975, Sikkim merged with India and became its 22nd state. That was done through the 36th Amendment of Indian Constitution. It was notified on 16th of May, and that is when the tricolor came up in Gangtok. Before that, Sikkim had a very fascinating and interesting move towards becoming a full-fledged state of India. Because when India became independent, two Himalayan states, Bhutan and Sikkim, from the British era had a special relationship with India. Bhutan and Sikkim both were kind of protectorates, but Bhutan much less than Sikkim. Bhutan had a lot more autonomy, but India was responsible for its security. In the course of time, Bhutan has total autonomy over its foreign policy, over all its policies. In fact, it has many agreements with India, but India does not have any overriding powers over Bhutan or responsibilities. For a long time, India was responsible for Bhutan's defense and also had a say in Bhutan's defense and foreign policy. No longer. Sikkim, on the other hand, went in the other direction. Sikkim already, in 1950, Sikkim was a kind of a protectorate. Nehru later kept on telling people, particularly foreigners who came to meet him, foreign journalists and foreign diplomats, that he does not like the word protectorate. But he was a bit shy about these things, or maybe hypocritical. So he would say, with Bhutan, we have a special relationship. We are responsible for the defense of Bhutan. With Sikkim, it's a little bit more. So Sikkim was a situation of a status of a protectorate, whereby Sikkim did not have sovereignty. India had suzerainty over Sikkim. India did not have sovereignty, but India had suzerainty. Now that is a bit complicated to explain. That is when a state has many powers, but not all the powers of a sovereign state. So in case of Sikkim, defense, foreign affairs, communication, and many other policies were controlled directly by New Delhi. Internal policies, internal governance, all of that was with the Chogyal, the ruler of Sikkim. Chogyal was the name of the ruler of Sikkim, like Maharaja and other places, or Badshah. Chogyals have gone back to
1642 AD.
Is when the Namgyal dynasty was founded by somebody who came from Tibet. Because as you know, these Himalayan lands were all very mixed up, and a lot of them had the same common ethnic stock. the Tibetan ethnic stock, which itself has many diversities within itself. So 1442, the Namgyal dynasty was founded. A descendant from the same dynasty was ruling Sikkim. In 1950, India and Sikkim signed a treaty, the Indo-Sikkim Treaty, under which Sikkim formally became a protectorate of India. India also funded Sikkim, Sikkim's government, Sikkim's development to quite some extent. Remember, Sikkim has a very small population. It's the smallest state in India
By population.
with just about 6.5 lakh people. In fact, when the new census is held, it will bring you some more rude surprises because Sikkim is the only state in India which has such a low birth rate that its population is declining. Its population is declining, and it can't be made up for by people coming in from other states and settling down there, because Sikkim has those protections like all the other northeastern states. And while Sikkim's birth rate is low, Sikkim also cannot have population replacement because of migration from outside, because Sikkim has protections like many other border states, tribal states. Sometimes your geographical location or geopolitical location can be a big asset. Sometimes it can also be a liability. It can be an asset usually if you're a country of a certain strength. But if you're not, then you get caught. So Sikkim, some fans of Sikkim at various points of time, particularly in the British era, described it like the Belgium of this part of the world, Belgium of the Himalayas. So Belgium got caught between the British power, the French power, and the German power as a kind of buffer state between the three of them, and those states struggled. Sikkim was caught between Imperial China, colonial India, and Nepal. So Sikkim was a tiny state with a very small population. I've told you now the population is about 6.5 lakhs. So you can imagine what it was like in 1890. 1890 is when the big Himalayan borders were decided. The big Himalayan border agreements were signed between then Tibetan administration and the colonial power in India. We know about the young husband expeditions, we know about the McMahon line. That's when our Himalayan borders were drawn. And in fact, most of those borders remain contested for India with China, and even for Pakistan, the Durand line with Afghanistan. In fact, Afghanistan, even the Taliban administration, this or the previous one or the Mujahideen before that, none of them has accepted the Durand line. All these lines in the mountainous frontiers were drawn under the British colonial power in that era, in the 1890s. So 1890, Sikkim was accepted by the Tibetan Authority as a protectorate of the British. That's when it was formalized. In fact, Sikkim at that point protested not because they did not want to become a protectorate of the British, but they did not like those borders. The Sikkimese believed, and they still do, that Chumbi Valley is a part of Sikkim. Chumbi Valley, see where it is located, see the map and see how critical it is for China and definitely for India. Because if Chumbi Valley was a part of Sikkim, which means a part of India now, then the threat that India feels at the Siliguri corridor, which is very narrow, and I don't like people calling it Chicken's Neck or Siliguri Neck. It's a very narrow corridor. India feels the threat there only because Chumbi Valley brings the Chinese much too close to it. And that is where the Doklam problem had arisen, because the Chinese had come to Doklam to a point from where they could overlook the entire Siliguri region. And that's why India crossed the borders, Bhutan's borders, and stopped the Chinese physically without firing any weapons, but basically getting in the way of the Chinese. So you can see where Sikkim is located, and that's a kind of a location. You can call it a location blessing, you can call it a location curse, depending on how the times are. So India had figured, as long as India and China had a good relationship, in fact, Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, it was a very good relationship. There was no real concern about Tibet. By the late 50s, this relationship began to sour. The first clashes in which a group of CRPF men were killed, ambushed and killed, that took place in 1959. That is, in fact, the National Police Memorial Day. From Around that time, India began to worry about Sikkim and Bhutan as well. That is where you see the statement from Nehru coming up every now and then. Although Nehru did not want to use force to merge Sikkim with India, Nehru in fact said at some point that to use force to merge Sikkim with India would be like using a bullet to kill a fly. I don't know. I don't like that comparison very much. And I don't know how Nehru said it. Sometimes these things become urban legends, but he's recorded as having said that as well. The 60s became more difficult for Sikkim because 1962 was the war. No action took place in Sikkim. Indian army was there. And everybody knows that Sikkim has the pass of Nathula. It had Nathula and Jelapla, which we lost later, but that's a different story. Nathula is the one big entry point between India and Tibet. India, since Sikkim became a part of India, but even before it became a part of India, Nathula was a very important pass because for anybody who wanted to say invade some part of India, eastern India, that was the fastest access to the heart of India. That's the reason. And if you see Nathula, Chumbi Valley is not far from it. And that's why Sir Charles Bell, who was a Tibetologist, a scholar, a diplomat, the British specialized in producing those types, he had said, he was the political officer to Sikkim, Bhutan, and Tibet. He had said that Chumbi Valley is like a dagger in the heart of India. So everybody has known the strategic importance of Chumbi Valley. That is why India began to get more worried that if the Chinese have to invade, they will come through Chumbi Valley, they will come and cut you off at Siliguri, and then separate the northeast from you. That's a fantasy many people have had, lately repeated also by Muhammad Yunus, the chief advisor of Bangladesh, although he quickly backtracked on that. Now 1963, December 1963, these dates are very important. 2nd December 1963, a new Chogyal takes over because his father Tashi dies. So the new Chogyal, Palden Thondup Namgyal, a very young man, he takes over. Now in March of that year, he married Hope Cook. Hope Cook was a young American woman. She was a traveling student from Sarah Lawrence College of New York, the storied Sarah Lawrence College. She had come into India for the usual American student thing. Sarah Lawrence College is also usually not for poor people, at least then it wasn't. She met Palden Thondup Namgyal, then Crown Prince of Sikkim, at a cafe or at a tea shop in Darjeeling, and they became friends. They got married in March of 1963. Remember, this is just a few months after India's war with China, India's disastrous war with China. Within 9 months, the same man becomes the Chogyal of Sikkim because his father dies. So Hope Cook, an American citizen, becomes the queen of Sikkim, or what is described in Sikkimese culture as the Gyalmo. So Chogyal is the Maharaja, Gyalmo is the Maharani. So she becomes the Gyalmo of Sikkim. That increased the insecurity level in India because her arrival there would mean visits by many Americans, many foreigners, many foreigners, many American diplomats, and this was also the playground. The Himalayan region was also the playground of the big issues between the Americans and the Chinese. It was around this time that the CIA and others were arming and financing Tibetan guerrillas, Khampas specifically. Until 1962, India allowed its own region to be used for those activities. Now India was more cautious. Also, this is the time when Nehru was declining and Kennedy then passed away soon after, and India-America relationship, which had really warmed up because of the Chinese invasion, because of the war with China, that again cooled off. It was in that complex situation that Indian establishment had to suddenly deal with an American Maharani in its most sensitive neighborhood. And then trouble started from there, suspicion started from there. Also, the Chogyal himself acquired some ambitions. He figured that geography gave him some geopolitical leverage. So why should he not use it? And I'm sure there were people putting this into his head as well. Then came the war with Pakistan in 1965. When the Chinese threatened India, they issued an ultimatum saying that your people have stolen some yaks and some sheep from our side. That ultimatum referred to the borders in Sikkim, right? That was a very hairy moment for India. That passed because the war was short. 1967, this came to a head. These tensions were simmering. They came to a head, and there was a clash between the Indian and the Chinese forces in 1967. In that clash, Indian army hit back quite hard. It hit back quite hard. It used heavy artillery, and the Chinese suffered very heavy casualties. So in the history of Indian army, it is seen as that was the day on which Indian army cured itself of the complexes it might have been carrying from the 1962 war. That 1967 clash has been recorded in great detail in the book. You will see the jacket on your screens. It's somewhere on my shelves, but I wasn't able to find it. I've written about it though. India's Forgotten Victory Over China by Probal Das Gupta. 1967, 62 the war with China, 65 the Chinese ultimatum during the war with Pakistan pertaining to the border in Sikkim, 1967 the big clash in Sikkim at the most key place, Nathula. That was the time when Indian forces vacated another pass a bit far away called Jelapla, but never went back to take it, and that's remained a regret with India since then. Nevertheless, Sikkim was now firmly in the focus. This was also the time when popular culture was discovering Sikkim. Devanand, of all people, Devanand discovered Sikkim. He became friends with the Chogyal of Sikkim. So if you've seen the film Jewel Thief, and even if you haven't seen Jewel Thief, it came out in the late 60s, I think 68 or thereabouts. Even if you haven't seen Jewel Thief, you remember some songs. For example, Vajanti Mala, Hotho mein aisi baat mein daba ke chali aayi. See the palace? That song was filmed in the Chogyal's palace. Also, some of the other songs and sequences have been filmed around the palace, the Tsukla Khang Royal Palace in Gangtok. What this was doing, like a knock-on effect, it was giving Chogyal the feeling that he was famous, he was powerful, that he had agency of his own, which was beyond the limitations that the treaty with India imposed on him. So he was pushing at the borders of that treaty, and that's what got Mrs. Gandhi very, very impatient. 1971, another war took place with Pakistan. By that time, Mrs. Gandhi knew that she was going to have to do something about Sikkim, that she did not want that half a sense of security with Sikkim, and she wanted to cut the autonomy that the Chogyal had. By this time, Sikkim's demographics had begun to assert themselves. The Chogyal come from the Tibetan origin community, or what is called as Bhutia Lepchas. You can call them the natives. The majority of people were Nepalis, simply because Nepalese are people who do migrate to other places in search for a livelihood. So many of them had migrated from Nepal in the west of Sikkim, and Sikkim had also seen many Gorkha invasions. So many people had stayed back. By this time, Sikkim's population was more than 80% of Nepalese origin, less than 20% of Bhutia Lepchas. In fact, today it would be around 85-15, if not even more skewed than that. That population started to push back at the Chogyal rule, saying Chogyal is a dictator. On whose will does he govern? Right? We need democracy. We need one person, one vote. So that protest started 1972, 1973. Those protests really picked up. This after the war in Bangladesh, after winning the war against Pakistan, Mrs. Gandhi was carrying out many bold and corrective steps along India's Himalayan borderlands. So among the first things she did almost immediately after the Pakistani army surrendered in Bangladesh was to declare Arunachal Pradesh to be a union territory, right? Until then, it was just an agency. It was called Northeast Frontier Agency. Now it became a union territory, so it became more formally India's territory. It was much later that it got its full statehood as well. That also came in the wake of another pushback from China in the Sumdurungchu crisis period, but that is a story we'll tell some other day. Mrs. Gandhi, first of all, then declared Arunachal to to be a union territory, forget Chinese protests. Then she decided to move into Sikkim because she felt insecure. She thought India was insecure with the Chogyal there, the Chogyals rule there, so many foreigners going in there, the Chinese sitting there, the recent clash with the Chinese in the same area, the Chumbi Valley, the Siliguri corridor, and all that. By 1973, there was a mass movement. There was a mass movement against the Chogyal led by a very mercurial leader called Kazi Lendup Dorji. Kazi Lendup Dorji was quite a character and an activist. He was not a Nepali. He was in a way a Sikkimese native, but he was a Democrat, he was a political activist, and he wanted power. He had been educated overseas and he had married Eliza Maria Langford Ray, who herself was quite a character. After she married Kazi, she became Kazini. Kazi was a title, K-A-Z-I. It's not Q-A-Z-I, not in the Islamist sense. That was his title. So his wife then became Kazini Elsa Maria Langford Ray. Now, a little story about her is that she came from Scotland. She was fully Scottish. She came from Scotland, attracted by Buddhism, and spent quite some time in Myanmar, or what was then Burma, learning Buddhism. That's when one of the storied fables of that era is that she was chased after quite determinedly by George Orwell, no less. There was only that many characters in that period that will be written about, or that will keep on featuring in your stories and literature. So that is how fascinating it was, and that is what makes these small Himalayan borderlands so interesting as well. Now, the Chogyals group said that Kazi Lendup Dorji was acting under the influence of his Scottish wife. Right? Kazi Lendup Dorji and Government of India thought that the Chogyal was acting under the influence of his American wife. And this built up from there. 1973, there were big protests, after which there was an election. In that election was conducted by the Election Commission of India. In that election, Kazi Lendup Dorji's party, Sikkim National Congress, which later merged with Indian National Congress, Sikkim National Congress won 31 seats out of 32. Of course, the Chogyal said that the election was rigged, it wasn't fair, that neutral parties should come and hold elections. But by this time, the winds had turned against him. Even the popular view had turned against him, and without a doubt, Indian agencies, Indian government was also involved in a lot of what was going on. 1973, this new government was brought in, and because of public disturbances and law and order troubles, a tripartite agreement was signed. Tripartite between the Chogyal, Government of India, and the Sikkimese political forces led by Kazi Lendup Dorji. Under this agreement, the Chogyal's powers were limited. They were reduced greatly. He had not become fully titular as yet. He still had some powers on internal issues, and he was seen as the head of state. This agreement, however, said, this tripartite agreement, that India will now appoint a chief executive for Sikkim. Also, India will now have a role in law and order, in ensuring law and order, and that Indian police could now act in the state of Sikkim. The agreement also said that the Chogyal will be given his due respect due to someone holding that title. So that was the first step to the merger of Sikkim, first formal step. This 1973 agreement, by the way, was signed on May 8. However, things did not settle down. Things kept on getting more and more complicated. By 1974, it looked like Sikkim was in nobody's control, and Sikkim was definitely not in the Chogyal's control. So, India carried out an important constitutional amendment. This constitutional amendment was the 35th, that was moved on 30th of August 1974. It was voted by Lok Sabha on 4th of September, by Rajya Sabha on 7th of September. It was signed off by the President of India on 22nd of February next year, 22nd of February in 1975. This constitutional amendment made Sikkim a kind of associate state of India. So a semi-merger had already taken place. A semi-merger took place, but tensions between the Chogyal and the political forces actually did not go down. They became worse because by this time the Chogyal was also getting desperate. And Chogyal was looking for foreign support and ideas from his foreign friends, and his wife was involved, the Gyalmo was involved as well. And that is when in April, Mrs. Gandhi decided to move. This is before she imposed the emergency. April 9, 1975, she moved army into the royal palace in Gangtok. The army disarmed the palace guards, just about 300 of them. Chogyal got very angry. He wrote to Mrs. Gandhi saying, it's so awful for me to see this situation because Indian army soldiers and my palace guards who are so few, they used to see each other as comrades and now they see each other as hostile. But Mrs. Gandhi's government said that this was only done to protect the Chogyal because he was under threat from his angry people. From here on, things moved very fast. April 9, 1975, army moves into the royal palace in Gangtok and puts the Chogyal under house arrest, although the government said that this was to protect him. Between April 10 and 14, I'm telling you it's moving at T20 speed. Between April 10 and 14, a referendum was held in Sikkim whether people wanted to merge with India or not. 97.5% said they wanted to merge with India. Of course, Chogyal said this was a sham, and many other Western forces, Western countries also said this is not convincing. Something else should be done. But Mrs. Gandhi wasn't one to care. The Chinese made big complaints, big noises, and big threats. And Mrs. Gandhi said, listen, before you lecture me on anything, I will tell you about what you did with Tibet. So stop talking. But the Chinese did not accept it. The Chinese kept on showing Sikkim as an independent country, as an independent entity until 2003. In 2003, when India-China relationship improved further, Mr. Vajpayee was in power here and Hu Jintao on the other side, and there were summit meetings between the two sides. Quietly and indirectly and unobtrusively, although nobody missed the point in India, the Chinese accepted Sikkim to be a part of India. How did they do it? They signaled it with genuine, usual Chinese characteristics. They agreed to open the Nathula border for trade with India. And that meant that Chinese had accepted Sikkim to be a part of India. Before that, Mrs. Gandhi had done her own dadagiri. At the UN, she had got the UN to drop Sikkim from the world map as a non-self-governing state. Earlier, Sikkim was there as a non-self-governing state. So a state in itself, but a protectorate of India, with India exercising suzerainty over it. She was pushing the UN to drop it. It had gone on for some time. It actually happened when she was not in power. It happened in 1978 when Janata Party government was in power. And then Morarji Desai, who was so muddle-headed, he in fact said on the record that he's not very happy with the way Sikkim was merged with India, but now, and he said this will scare many other small countries in our neighborhood, and he said, but now that it's been done, I can't reverse it. So pakka hypocrisy of the personality. In fact, many of Morarji Desai's actions reflected that. I have read declassified accounts of his conversations with Jimmy Carter when he visited the White House as Prime Minister of India. In that, one of those conversations is recorded as saying, he's asked, what's the difference between you and Nehru? And he said, my idol is Mahatma Gandhi. Nehru's ideal was Machiavelli. So Morarji was a bit of a twisted character, or maybe too straightforward a character to be Prime Minister of India. So he said these things, but it didn't change anything. April 10 and 14, we get back to our story. April 10 and 14, the referendum is held. I told you it's happening at T20 speed. Overs are running out, and this is power play. So April 9, the army goes into the royal palace. April 10 to 14, referendum is held. April 26, just 12 days later, Parliament passes the 36th Amendment, making Sikkim the 22nd state, full-fledged state of India. Now, in that amendment, there are some interesting things. There are interesting things like, first of all, the Chogyal will lose all his titles, all his privileges. And that was of a piece with what Mrs. Gandhi had done with her abolition of privy purses and princely privileges earlier in her socialist drive. Around time, she also nationalized the banks in the same phase. So Chogyal now lost his title and all privileges. Also, in the amendment, an elected assembly was to come in place in Sikkim, but there were restrictions on what it could do. And one of those restrictions was to discuss anything to do with the Chogyal or his family, or to discuss or debate anything to do with the merger of Sikkim with India. Now, what happened to the characters involved? The Chogyal himself, he died on January 29, 1982. In fact, I was then covering the Northeast for the Indian Express, and I had gone to Gangtok to cover his funeral, my first visit to Gangtok. And a little side story, when I went in, I met local people and local journalists and others, and many of them said, "Arey, you just come in." We had a brilliant Indian intelligence officer posted here, namely Ajit Doval. That sidelight apart, the Chogyal died young at 59. After him, there was no other Chogyal. His wife, Hope Cook, she left. We are not quite sure whether she left in 1975 or 1976 after the merger. She took the two kids who were born from her to the US. She now lives in California, in San Francisco, with two of her kids who are there. She also wrote a famous autobiography, a memoir called Time Change, that was published in 1980. She also became a lecturer, etc. She's now in her 80s and has fallen off the radar, as have the Chogyal's children. I do remember, however, that when I went to cover the funeral, the Chogyal's funeral, did go into the palace and met one of his sons. Now, I don't remember which one. And Indian Express archives from that period are very difficult to find. So maybe someday I will find it and tell you more about it, because I had quoted him in at least one or two of the stories that I had done out of Gangtok at that because I had quoted him in at least one or two of the stories that I had reported from Gangtok at that time. However, this is the 50 years since Sikkim became a state in India, and it was a good day for us to look at how exactly it came about and also understand the geopolitics of such a critically located tiny state with such a small population.